we're living right now in what some people call the urban century. We've never seen urbanization at the pace and scale as what we've seen over the last 50 years. There'll be about 9 billion plus people living in cities by 2050, and 65 million more people are added to cities every single year. This urbanization isn't evenly distributed. I mean, the vast majority is happening not in the north, as in North America and Western Europe, but in the south, in the Americas and Africa and Asia. And this massive movement to the city has enormous opportunity and promise, but it also has a dark side. What we're seeing is people are bringing their problems and challenges to the city. We're seeing enormous amounts of disruption in the city. And we're seeing new forms of violence, both organized and interpersonal in cities, in ways that we just haven't seen in the past. What's happening with the internet is simultaneously we're seeing an explosion in access to the internet. And the digital divides between countries, between cities, and within cities are starting to fall down. And what we're seeing is a kind of a combination of the net with this urbanization, generating new forms of what I call virtual violence, wherein you have organized political groups using the internet to amplify their messages, wherein you have gangs using the internet to push their product or intimidate rivals, wherein you have even young kids using the internet to bully and intimidate one another. And so this new ecosystem of the internet within cities, I think, is generating enormous sets of challenges for law enforcement, for social welfare services, and for governments at large to try to manage. A couple of years ago here at SecDev.Foundation, we set up a project called the Open Empowerment Initiative. And the idea was to really understand how the internet was enabling new forms of political, social, and economic agency around the world, specifically though in the Americas. And we set up big digital surveillance systems in places like Brazil, in Argentina, in El Salvador, Colombia, and Mexico, to look at the ways that the internet was in fact creating forms of empowerment that allowed young people to express their wishes, to seek better incomes and expand their livelihoods, and also to press for political change. And in the course of doing this, we discovered a whole ecosystem of activity, but we also detected a number of gangs and criminal groups that were also taking the net and colonizing cyberspace in new and insidious ways. We started to examine the role of cartels and Mexican crime groups up in Tijuana, for example, and over in Chihuahua, and looked at the ways that they were using the internet to intimidate their rivals, to sell drugs, to move various forms of contraband, both within Mexico and across borders. As we went down towards El Salvador, we saw the MS-13 and Barrio 18, two large gangs, also using the internet, not just in prisons where they were organizing essentially their cliques and their groups, but also outside of them to take out police and to order assassinations, to again mark their turf against rival factions, as well as to express their status and power online. As we moved down to Colombia, we saw in Medellin the backroom groups also using the internet in new ways, and in Brazil the PCC and the Comando Vermelho, two very large groups using the internet and getting onto social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter and harassing and also soliciting potential rivals and clients. So I think what we saw unintentionally was a vast array of different organized crime groups migrating online and starting to present a real and critical threat to governments and civil societies across the region. You know, what we've seen in the last couple of years, last decades in fact, is a growing challenge of urban violence, and both virtual violence in the cities, but as well as in real life violence in cities. And a number of governments at the federal, state, and city levels have started to try to come to terms with this and find new and interesting ways of engaging it. And I think one of the key strategies that are emerging is the emphasis on focusing on hot spots and hot people. Everyone knows in cities, anywhere you are in the world, whether it's in Ottawa, whether it's in New York, whether it's in London, whether it's in Hanoi, whether it's elsewhere, is that violence concentrates in specific spatial areas within specific communities at specific times. We also now increasingly know that violence, whether it's, especially in cities, concentrates among specific demographic groups, especially young people. And so the emphasis now, I think, for governments, specifically law enforcement as well as social welfare services, is to start having smarter responses by focusing geographically in those areas where we're most likely to see urban violence emerge, as well as amongst those people who are most likely to be perpetrators and or victims. And perpetrators and victims often are the same profile of individuals. So if we're going to get really serious about engaging with urban violence, and especially digitally enabled urban violence, we need responses that are smarter from our governments. We need tech companies who are also, in some cases, facilitating through social media platforms some of these challenges to also start engaging in ways that are not eroding the privacy of individuals, but are sharpening our responses to engage with extremist style messages. And we need to start enabling civil society groups from the bottom up who are already developing ingenious strategies and solutions in affected communities around the world, and give them space and opportunity and skills to be able to expand and scale their work. So it's got to be an all of government, all of private sector, all of civil society approach if we're going to get to terms with these really grave challenges.